Just finishing the last of these files. It's been a long day, that's all.
Nora, you're hurt. Tell me what really happened.
It wasn't random, Gabriel. They wanted me to stay silent because I know who ordered everything.
All this time, we've been hunting the wrong people.
You're safe now, Nora. No one's gonna hurt you again.
Gabriel, don't let them find us.
I won't, I promise. Seeing you smile is all I ever wanted.
For the first time in a long while.
As long as I'm here, you'll never face this alone.
He didn't love her. She didn't love him. They understood each other perfectly, which is exactly why Gabriel Romano and Sloane Kensington's wedding was supposed to work. It was a transaction written in imported silk and 300 guests. A merger between two syndicates. A strategic alliance that would close tomorrow. Except it wouldn't. Gabriel stood on a velvet platform in a boutique that smelled of lavender oil and old money, while a tailor named Bianca fussed with the cuffs of a suit that cost more than most people's cars. The jacket was charcoal, cut close to hide the leather shoulder holster he refused to remove, even for fittings. His fiancée sat behind him on a plush sofa, phone in hand, firing off demands to people whose names she wouldn't bother to remember. She wanted white flowers, silver accents, black touches, a palette as cold and calculated as she was. "Whatever you want, Sloane," Gabriel said, his voice completely flat. He meant it. He didn't care about flowers. What he cared about was already gone. Nora Quinn had been his assistant for 4 years. 4 years of coffee delivered at exactly the right temperature. Black, burning hot, no exceptions. 4 years of watching her slip through the Kensington enforcers with a stack of files and a polite request to move their feet so she could vacuum. 4 years of existing in the perfect, sterile boundary between his violent world and his carefully constructed lie. She was the buffer, the ghost in the machine, a woman of unremarkable height, practical shoes, and an unnerving lack of intimidation that somehow made her invisible to everyone except him. He noticed her. He just never let her know it mattered. Tuesday evening, he saw her standing by the shredder, feeding documents into the machine with methodical precision. Her skin was the color of old parchment. A massive bruise covered half her face, partially hidden by poorly matched concealer. There was a cut on her lower lip. When he asked her about it, she offered a dry, flat smile and blamed an open cabinet door. He accepted the lie because it was convenient, because he had a wedding to plan, because he was blind. But standing on that platform, draped in silk and arrogance, Gabriel realized Nora hadn't checked in for 48 hours. Not one message, not one email, nothing. Sloane was complaining about the photographer's timeline when Gabriel stepped off the pedestal, shrugged off the unfinished coat, and walked toward the door. "Gabriel, what are you doing? The wedding is in 2 days. Nora hasn't checked in for 48 hours, he interrupted, buttoning his shirt with quick, impatient fingers. "She holds the encryption keys. She has the physical ledger for the doc payoffs. If she's gone, she's either selling me out or she's dead." Sloane let out an elegant sigh, crossing her long legs. "She's probably just hung over or looking for a raise. Your secretary isn't a priority right now." Gabriel stopped. He looked at his fiancée, really looked at her. Her skin was flawless, her nails manicured, her life entirely insulated from the blood that paid for the ring on her left hand. "She's not a secretary," he said quietly, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet rasp that made grown men empty their bladders. "And you need to understand something, Sloane. I don't send people to handle my liabilities. I handle them myself." He walked out of the boutique before she could reply, the little brass bell above the door chiming a cheerful, mocking goodbye. Garrison Street was a decaying artery of the city, choked with condemned buildings and desperate people. It was the kind of place where streetlights were shot out for privacy, and the police only came to collect bodies. When Gabriel's security chief had sent him the address an hour before, Gabriel stared at it in disbelief. He paid Nora a salary that should have secured her a high-rise downtown with a doorman and secure parking. So why was she living here? What kind of game was she playing? There was no buzzer. The glass in the front door had been smashed out and temporarily patched with warped plywood. Gabriel pushed it open, and the hinges screamed in protest. The stench hit him immediately. Boiled cabbage, stale cigarette smoke, the sharp chemical tang of bleach trying and failing to mask the scent of cat urine. The hallway was narrow, the walls painted a sickly institutional green that was peeling away in long, dry strips. A single fluorescent tube flickered on the ceiling, buzzing like an angry hornet. Gabriel moved silently up the stairs, his hand instinctively brushing against the lapel of his coat, feeling the hard outline of his gun. He passed the second floor, then the third, moving through a world of survival. Crying babies, muffled television dialogue, arguments in languages he didn't recognize. It was the exact opposite of everything he had just left. The exact opposite of Sloane. When he pushed open her apartment door, he found almost nothing. No furniture, no television, no rugs, just a cheap folding table pushed against the far wall, holding a bulky laptop, a stack of heavily encrypted external hard drives, and a neat, meticulously organized row of manila folders containing his entire empire. She had poured every penny into somewhere else. Somewhere with gardens. Somewhere for her mother. "Nora," he called out. His voice sounded too loud in the hollow space, harsh and intrusive. No answer, only the sound of the rain lashing against the glass. He moved further into the apartment. The tiny galley kitchen was a wasteland, refrigerator unplugged, door hanging open to reveal empty wire shelves. The sink was dry. He turned down the short hallway toward the bedroom and the bathroom. That's when he saw it. Smears of dark, rusty brown on the linoleum floor. Not splatters. Drags. The dragging marks of someone who couldn't lift their own weight. The metallic scent of copper, sharp and heavy, cut through the damp cold of the apartment. Gabriel's pulse kicked against his throat. He followed the trail. She was sitting on the floor, wedged in the narrow space between a chipped porcelain bathtub and the toilet. A single bare bulb hung from a wire above the sink, casting her in cruel, unforgiving light. She wasn't dead, but she looked like she was trying to be. She wore an oversized gray t-shirt completely soaked through with sweat and dark, blossoming stains of blood. Her bare legs were splayed out in front of her. A thick, bloody towel was wadded up and pressed hard against her left thigh. Her head lolled to the side against the bathtub, skin the color of old parchment, gray and translucent, stretched tight over the bones of her face. The bruise he had seen on Tuesday was now a massive, ugly sprawl of purple and yellow covering half her face. She was holding a curved needle threaded with thick black nylon. Her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't find the grip to push it through her own skin. For a man who had built an empire on violence, who had watched men die without his heart rate spiking, the sight of his quiet, unassuming assistant try and stitch up her own bullet wound felt like a physical blow to the sternum. Gabriel dropped his gun on the edge of the sink. It landed with a heavy clack. Nora's head snapped up. Her eyes, usually sharp and observant, were glassy and unfocused with fever. She stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just let out a dry, rattling breath and dropped her head back against the tub. "You're tracking mud on the floor, boss," she rasped. Gabriel fell to his knees beside her. The cold seeping through his expensive trousers didn't register. He reached out and pried the needle gently but firmly from her trembling fingers. "What happened?" he demanded. His voice was too harsh, too loud, cracking the fragile silence of the room. "Don't yell at me," Nora whispered, closing her eyes. "I have a headache." "Nora, look at me." Gabriel grabbed her chin, tilting her face up. Her skin was burning hot. The fever was raging. "Who shot you?" She let out a weak, humorless laugh that ended in a cough. "Nobody shot me, Gabriel. Do I look careless?" It was a knife. A very big, very ugly knife. Gabriel pulled the wadded towel away from her thigh. The wound was deep, jagged, weeping sluggishly. The edges were inflamed and angry red. Infection had already set in. "Why didn't you call the syndicate doctor?" Gabriel snarled, grabbing a relatively clean section of the towel and pressing it back against the wound. "Why didn't you call me?" Nora panted, her hands gripping the edge of the bathtub until her knuckles turned white. "The doctor works for your uncle," she said between gasps. "And your uncle works for the Kensingtons." Gabriel went perfectly still. The blood rushing in his ears sounded like the ocean. "What did you say?" Nora opened her eyes. The fever was there, but the sharp, cynical intelligence that made her indispensable cut straight through the haze. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. The merger is a hostile takeover, Gabriel. Sloane's family isn't joining you. They're absorbing you. The hit was supposed to happen at the rehearsal dinner tonight. Poison. Clean. They blame a rival family. Sloane plays the grieving widow, and her father takes the docks. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. I found the digital trail on Tuesday. Your uncle routed the payoff money to the caterers. I went to intercept the courier carrying the physical proof. The courier was a Kensington enforcer. She gestured weakly to her leg, then to her bruised face. He was faster than I thought. Gabriel stared at her. The silence in the bathroom stretched out, heavy and suffocating. He thought of Sloane sitting in the boutique, complaining about the color of the flowers while she planned his funeral. He thought of his uncle, kissing him on the cheek at Christmas. And then he looked at Nora, living in a freezing box, bleeding to keep him breathing. Why? Gabriel asked. The word was stripped of all authority. It was just a raw, desperate question from a man who suddenly realized he was standing on quicksand. Why didn't you bring this to me immediately? Why are you living like this? Nora let her head roll toward him. A cynical, tired smile ghosted across her split lip. Because you were picking out suits, Gabriel. You wanted this merger so badly you stopped looking at the shadows. If I brought it to you without ironclad proof, you would have thought I was trying to sabotage the wedding. She looked away, staring at the peeling paint on the opposite wall. And I live like this because my mother's medical care costs $8,000 a month. The facility is nice. They have gardens. Gabriel felt a knot form in his throat, tight and hard. He paid her enough to afford the care and a life for herself. But she was sinking every penny into keeping her mother comfortable, choosing to live in squalor so he wouldn't know she was vulnerable. She didn't want him to think she was a liability. Hold still, Gabriel commanded, his voice dropping to a low, rough rumble. He shoved his $3,000 bespoke suit jacket aside, rolled up his sleeves, and opened the pathetic first aid kit sitting on the toilet seat. He found a bottle of rubbing alcohol. This is going to burn, he warned. Just do it, Nora gritted out, grabbing the rim of the bathtub with both hands. He poured the alcohol directly over the jagged slice in her thigh. Nora's back arched, a strangled, guttural sound tearing from her throat. She bit down on her own shoulder to keep from screaming, her body trembling violently under his hands. Gabriel's jaw locked. He felt every tremor passing through her. He threaded the needle with steady mechanical precision. He had sewn up his own men before in basements and back alleys, but this felt different. Every puncture of the needle through her pale skin felt like an indictment of his own blindness. He worked in silence, pulling the nylon thread tight, tying it off, snipping the end with tiny rusted scissors. He wrapped gauze around her leg, pulling it tight enough to stem the bleeding, but gentle enough not to cause more pain. As he worked, he noticed the other marks on her. A faint silver scar on her collarbone. A burn mark on her wrist he had never seen because she always wore long sleeves. She was a map of quiet, unacknowledged violence. She took the hits meant for his empire, swallowed the pain, and handed him his morning coffee with a blank face. By the time Gabriel had carried her from that apartment through the rain to his estate, his mind had already made the decision. His personal physician, Victor, arrived within minutes and immediately started pumping her full of antibiotics and 4 fluids. Gabriel stood by the window, forcing himself to watch as Victor cut away her blood-soaked shirt and assess the damage. Her core temperature is 103, Victor muttered, hooking a bag of clear fluid to an four-pole. Dehydration. Severe exhaustion. The wound is nasty, Gabriel. Whoever twisted that blade before pulling it out. You did a decent job stopping the bleed, but the infection is already racing through her bloodstream. Gabriel crossed his arms. Will she keep the leg? Yes, provided her heart doesn't give out from the fever first. Gabriel, when was the last time she ate? Her ribs are bruising her skin from the inside out. It's like she's been running on fumes and black coffee for a year. The words felt like a physical strike. Gabriel looked at Nora's collarbones, sharp and protruding beneath the harsh overhead light. He thought about the catered lunches he expensed to his office, the heavy, rich meals he ate while she sat at her desk outside his door, quietly organizing his empire. He had never once asked if she had eaten. His burner phone buzzed at exactly midnight. The screen glared brightly in the dim study, displaying Sloane's name. He stared at it for a long moment, then answered, "Where are you?" Sloane's voice was tiny, sharp, and impatient. "Liam said you went to the south side. Gabriel, the caterer is threatening to walk if we don't finalize the truffle risotto versus the wild mushroom risotto." Gabriel stared at the blood on his hands. It was sticky, drying into the creases of his knuckles. He thought of his uncle. He thought of the poison. He thought of Nora lying in his guest room with a fever raging through her body. "Sloane," Gabriel said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice he used right before a room caught fire. "What? And don't use that tone with me. Listen to me carefully," Gabriel interrupted softly. "There is no risotto. There is no rehearsal dinner. The wedding is canceled." Silence on the other end of the line. A long stretching void. "Excuse me," Sloane finally hissed, the facade cracking. "You cannot cancel this wedding, Gabriel. Do you understand what my father will—" "This is a hostile takeover," Gabriel corrected, his voice dropping even lower. "And your father is going to find out very shortly that the Romano ports are closed to him. Tell him the courier he sent Tuesday was sloppy. Tell him my secretary sends her regards." He hung up before she could respond and crushed the phone in his hand, feeling the cheap plastic screen spiderweb and crack under his grip. The docks at Pier 4 smelled of diesel, rust, and inevitability. Gabriel and his men moved through the darkness like ghosts. They had memorized the blueprints Nora had pulled from the encrypted hard drives. They knew the blind spots. They knew the angles. When the Kensington trucks arrived, expecting easy prey, they walked straight into a slaughter. 3 men died in 10 seconds. Neat, suppressed, efficient. And then there was Carlo. Carlo Romano stood backed up against the corrugated metal wall of the warehouse, his hands raised, shaking violently. He was the man who had taught Gabriel how to shoot. The man who had stood at his father's funeral and sworn loyalty to the bloodline. And he had sold him to the Kensingtons to cover a gambling debt at the Bellagio. "Gabriel," Carlo pleaded, his voice cracking into pure, unfiltered panic. "It's not what you think. They forced me. Sloane's father, he threatened my daughters." "You don't have daughters, Carlo," Gabriel said quietly. "You have 2 ex-wives who hate you and a gambling debt that maxed out at $3 million on Monday." Carlo's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lie had died in his throat. "You sold my life and the lives of my men to cover a bad streak at Baccarat," Gabriel continued. He didn't feel angry. He felt nothing at all. It was a terrifying, hollow void in his chest. Carlo's face twisted into an ugly sneer as he realized begging wouldn't work. "A secretary?" he spat. "You're going to burn your own blood for a glorified typist?" Gabriel raised his weapon, locking his elbow. "She isn't a typist," he said quietly. "She's the woman who just ended your life." 2 shots. Center mass. Carlo hit the concrete and never got back up. By morning, the fever had broken. The Boston area code came through, and he answered without hesitation. "Gabriel." Richard Kensington's voice wasn't smooth anymore. It was tight. The sound of a man who had just looked into the back of a box truck and seen his own mortality. "What have you done?" "I returned your property," Gabriel said, his voice smooth, carrying no malice, only absolute authority. "I hope the flight back to Boston is comfortable." The line went dead. Gabriel turned to look at the bed. Nora was stirring, her breathing deep and even. The fever was finally gone. The dark bruising on her face was stark against the white pillows. She opened her eyes. "Your mother's facility is fully funded," he said, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "Fully. Through my private trust. The apartment on Garrison Street is done. Liam is packing your things. And then he's burning that building to the ground." Nora's lips parted. "You can't just mandate my life." "I just did," Gabriel interrupted softly. He leaned closer, the scent of soap and black coffee enveloping her. "You bled for me. You're never going back to a desk outside my door. You're staying here. You're my partner. And if anyone ever looks at you sideways again, I will tear their eyes out." Nora stared at him, the cynical, pragmatic wall she had built around her heart finally cracking and falling away. There was no fairy tale here. He was a violent, dangerous man. She was the woman who kept his ledgers. Their hands were both covered in blood. But in the cold, brutal light of the mafia world, It was the truest form of devotion she had ever seen. "Okay," she whispered, her fingers curling into his shirt. Gabriel didn't smile. He didn't need to. He leaned down and pressed his lips softly against her forehead, lingering there, a silent, absolute vow of protection. The game was over. The desk was gone. Nora Quinn was no longer the assistant in the shadows. She was the queen of the board, and Gabriel Romano was never going to let her fall again. In a world built on violence and deception, where loyalty is measured in blood, Gabriel had burned down his entire empire and rebuilt it around one woman. Not because she was useful, not because she was valuable, but because she had bled to keep him alive, and in his violent, unforgiving world, that meant everything. That meant forever.